Anyway, good evening. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very, very much for joining us. I'll try to speed through the few minutes a few words I have to say because I do. Anyway, we're delighted to welcome Professor Orly Lewis, a brilliant scholar from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and the creator of Atlomi, a Greco-Roman anatomy atlas, for today's webinar. Welcome and thank you. Just a little bit of housekeeping. This is being recorded. Uh, Assuming it doesn't bother anybody, and we'll make the recording available afterwards on the British Friends website for anybody who's interested. Everybody's muted and will stay muted throughout the talk, except for Orly and myself when we open it for the Q&A. If you have any questions, which you're very, very welcome to ask, there's a chat box. Please put your questions there, and when we open it for Q&A after Orly's presentation, we'll pick up the questions from there. And do opt into our newsletter. We'll put up the link in the chat box a bit later, and you can stay updated with all our events, webinars, and goings on the Hebrew U and British Friends. And that's it, really. So, Professor Lewis's work brings together academic insight, technical innovation, and a deeply creative approach to science. And we're thrilled to have her here with us to share her expertise and vision. We hope you enjoy this session and find it as inspiring as I know it will be. Thank you and very much, Orly. The floor is all yours. I'll stop sharing screen.
Okay. So hello, everyone. And thank you, Ariana. Thank you, Nigel, for the introduction and for the invitation. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. Let's find the share screen. Okay. Can everyone see the screen? Good. That's a good start. Okay, so let me begin by saying that one of the hazards that one doesn't tell you about when you start studying the history of medicine is the danger of what one may call sort of pathological assimilation with the texts that we are reading. So I found myself at a very early stage of my work already in my MA studies, noticing that when I'm reading and studying and researching and trying to write about a particular disease or phenomenon, that that my body was trying to feel the same thing. So if I was working on the pulse and respiration, so suddenly my heartbeat was I was very conscious of my heartbeat, which is usually not a very good thing. When I was working on treatments of the head, I was getting many more headaches. I was working on the digestive theory. So the theory of digestion in antiquity. So my stomach was taking part in it too. And I say that I've noticed this also in recent years with my students and some colleagues. So this is what happens. This is part of the field. And this, what one may call again, unhealthy immersion into our ancient text, and led to a slightly embarrassing episode about 15 years ago when I was a PhD student in Berlin. And unfortunately, I had a bike accident, so my helmet did a good work there, but I still had some concussion. But I do remember being wheeled to a CAT scan, to the CT scan, and telling the nurse and the technician that, 2,500 years ago, in the days of Hippocrates, they couldn't have looked into my brain without damaging it, and they wouldn't have known how to treat me. And just imagine what they could not see, and so forth. It was quite a monologue for me in some broken German. I don't think there was much conversation back. And while you may think that I'm making up this story just to sort of get us going with a funny anecdote, it might have been less embarrassing if I were making it up rather than actually living through it. But all this is just to say that these sort of gray mental boundaries between us researchers and historians and our objects of research, that in my case is ancient Greek and Roman physicians and patients, this sort of space between us, between me and them, and through mediated mainly through the text that they left me or us. In this space, anatomy really represents, as far as I feel from different fields that I worked on in ancient medicine and history of medicine, maybe one of the most confusing one, insofar that sometimes we feel and perceive that the differences are not so great, and we kind of lose the boundaries between, is this ancient, is this modern, how does this fit together, because things seem so similar. And the reason for this is that, in fact, most of the anatomy we know today and work with today in the modern theory was already mapped and named, at least on the macro level, the sort of level that we can see with our eyes, even if with some difficulty, was already mapped and named in the period that I'll be talking about today and the period I researched. So the period that we'll be talking about today is a particular period between the 4th and 3rd centuries BCE. So about 200 years of a lot of medical work, but my work spans a few more centuries into the early Christian era. But in this period, if we think of anatomy today, and we find in our texts most of the many descriptions that are very, very familiar if we compare them to modern textbooks. And we also find lots of terms which are confusingly similar. So I'm sure some of you have, probably all of you, have encountered in some way some of these terms, which are actually Greek: cardia, arteria, neuron. Even if you're not a native English speaker, I'm sure some of it has, of course, come into other languages. So things seem so familiar, but even this fairly innocent word of cardia, which sounds, it meant heart even in antiquity and in ancient Greece. It also could mean other things, like the connection between our esophagus and the stomach, so not exactly our heart. And this is to say that when studying ancient anatomy, which is what we're going to be talking about today, we have the further difficulty, besides our modern biases, that in antiquity, it's the time of discovery. And we're dealing with not just with one single anatomy, but with many anatomies. So today, if you open an anatomical atlas, or you go and study medicine and study anatomy, wherever you are in the world, whichever book you open, there's one anatomy. It's been standardized. There are still some questions to be asked and still some research, but basically it's one and the same theory throughout. But in the period that we're going to talk about today, this is when things are being discovered, new ideas emerge. Every one of these physicians and scientists in antiquity, that some of whom I'll be talking about today, are opening the body and interpreting it in the way that they can and want to interpret it. And they're using their own terminology, which is sometimes similar to their colleagues and sometimes a bit different, in order to describe what they're seeing. And we historians have to deal with this and have to shift between these different anatomies, and think as well, or not think, or shed the ideas that we have as modern people in the modern world, knowing something about modern anatomies at some level. So I'm going to show you take you on this journey a bit to see this sometimes confusion, how we can solve it. But before that, I want to give you some context of what it means when we talk about anatomy. So the Greek word anatome, so we have very, very familiar, yes, anatome, meant in antiquity not just the field of knowledge about the structure of the body, so what we call anatomy still today. It also meant the practical method of gaining that knowledge. So opening up, cutting up the living or the dead body, what we call dissections for the dead body or vivisection for living body, cutting it up, cutting it open in order to learn about it and to gain this knowledge about the structure of the body. The Greek term anatome literally means to cut open or cut up or cut in. And the ancients, you see here an image, a quite fairly famous image. Some of you may have seen it already, of from the 17th century, depicting Galen, a physician we won't be talking about today, but a very important physician from antiquity, dissecting a pig. And indeed, throughout most of antiquity, much of the empirical research into anatomy was performed on animals. There was a small period of time in the 3rd century BC, and don't worry if you're I'm moving a bit between centuries. It's fine. No need to remember all the different dates, but just to give some context. There was a short period where it was possible to dissect humans and even vivisect humans, prisoners mainly. But and this period did have a lot of significant consequences, but most of the time they were dissecting animals with much awareness to the fact that of the limitations of dissecting animals in order to learn also about humans. With much awareness that some animals are more helpful and useful to learn about the human body. For instance, the pig, as here, but also, of course, apes. But Galen was dissecting, and others were dissecting cattle, sheep, goats, dogs, and many other animals. And we need to think and bear in mind that when we are reading the texts, and for them, in order to transmit much of their knowledge, they wrote their ideas down in text. They had to describe the body in their words. But at the basis of the text that we are reading today lies the body, this very visual, tangible, three-dimensional thing, and which object that's one. If one cuts open, it's not entirely clear what one sees, even when one knows very well what they are looking for. One needs to find it. And they're looking into that body, as I said, interpreting it and transmitting it usually into words. They were using some illustrations, but most of the time they assumed that we would be reading these texts. So their students, their colleagues would be reading the text alongside the body while dissecting themselves or with their teacher. So when we come to these texts, we historians are usually trained, or classicists are usually trained to interpret, to open, and to read and interpret texts, not the body. So there's a gap that we need to bridge when we're trying to interpret these texts between this word, the verbal words that we're reading, and the empirical, very visual information lying at the basis of these texts. And what I'm going to talk about today is also, besides telling you a bit some history of anatomy and some details, is telling you how my team and I in my lab at the Hebrew University have been working in recent years and still are to overcome these gaps, to sort of break through back into the visual world that stands at the basis of the ancient texts, not just using philology and historical analysis, which are the tools, the traditional tools of historians of medicine and classicists, enhancing them, so still very much rooted in the close reading of the ancient texts, but enhancing them by using new methods. I won't be talking about all the methods today. We also use AI tools and various other stuff, but the main two methods which have really brought us forward is experimental work in reenacting ancient dissections. We have very detailed explanations of how to do that. The ancients left us very detailed explanations about how to dissect in order to see what they're describing. Here you see us also at the part of my team is from the veterinary school of the Hebrew University, which is actually the only veterinary school in Israel. And that's where we do in the anatomy lab much of this, the empirical research. But also with a new method that we've brought into the history of science and certainly into the history of ancient science is what we call visual analysis, which is creating 3D models of the ancient ideas, not only in order to present them more clearly, but also in order to understand them, to really analyze the text through this visual and creative work. And this is part of what we'll be talking about and seeing today. So some points I just want you to bear in mind. Again, this issue of the many anatomies and what does it mean to move from one to another? Why do these new ideas emerge? Why not always open the body and explain it in the same way? How come suddenly one day, so to speak, one physician opens the body and sees and explains it in a different way? So have that in mind when we are going through our information today, this possible tension or confusion, and how do we move between the text and the visual, between the body and the text we have. And since we cannot talk about everything today and all the body, and especially not when we have so many bodies that one should be taken into consideration, I've chosen the heart as a case study that we'll walk through the heart a bit and some different opinions about it. I'll focus on two, the others. So if you have some questions at the end about other ideas, then please ask. And just to say one small warning, so some of the material I'll be showing, not much, but a few of the images will be from dissections that we performed. They'll be shown for a fairly short time. Not everyone feels very comfortable with these photos, but without them, it sort of undermines what I'm been trying to show you. I'll be trying to show you. So if you feel uncomfortable with them, just look away for 30 seconds and then rejoin us. And of course, all this has been done. We have the ethical authorizations through the European Union and the research. So, and none of the animals were killed for the point of our research, and all of it was done as should have been done. So let's go into the hearts, and I'll take you through two examples. One name you might be familiar with, more of you, Aristotle in the 4th century BC, and another example would be from what we call the Hippocratic corpus, but the text from the 3rd century, for some reason it says CE, but it's BCE. I'm sorry about that. So fairly close text from the same sort of period. And I'll explain what I mean by the Hippocratic corpus when we get to that example. So Aristotle, philosopher, working in the 4th century BC. Many of you may know a lot of his work about the soul and about ethics and many other philosophical fields. But Aristotle had major works and really set some of the foundations for the fields of biology and zoology. So part of his research into the natural world was an immense work of understanding the animal world through the structure, the anatomy of different animals, the physiology of different animals, how this also affects the way these animals behave. Very detailed, very broad and deep. So really an immense work. And in his work on comparative anatomy, he really examines the anatomy and was dissecting and examining animals from sea urchins to apes and cows. So from very small animals we barely may think of to much bigger animals, which are much more present in our daily life. And Aristotle also is the one, as we know it in the Greco-Roman world, who set and started systematic anatomical research through systematic dissections and opening up the body to study it carefully and document it. Now, Aristotle's theory of how the body of animals works and functions, and his theory of soul, and mind, body, soul, sets the heart as the vital and cognitive center. So for him, all the capacities of both, for him, both vital and digestive, nutritive capacities are all part of what the soul does, not just cognitive, sense perception and such capacities, but everything is centered around the heart. Everything is dependent on the functionality of the heart. And he, of course, goes into much detail to explain how this works in practice. But for that, he also has quite a fairly detailed discussion of how the heart is structured. And I'm giving you here a very short excerpt, and I'm deliberately giving you some text as well. And if you feel some confusion for fairly different reasons, possibly different people here, about what you're reading, that's good. That's a very natural, very healthy feeling that one should encounter when reading such a text. So again, this is translated from Greek from the 4th century BCE. So the heart has three cavities, what he calls koilia in Greek, but this term can also mean can mean intestines, many different things. It is situated inward from the lungs at the junction with the windpipe. Inside the cavities of the heart, there are tendons, neura in Greek. The heart is not large. Its overall shape is not oblong, but rather roundish, except for the tip, which is narrow to a point. And just look how many words one needs in order to describe what the heart actually looks like. So first of all, the idea that one should describe it, but also how do you describe it? How do you perceive and what kind of adjective for the shape or for its size? When you can't just say a particular number of centimeters, which is possibly, or the weight in particular very minute quantities. So, as we have said, tells us Aristotle, the heart has three cavities, the largest on the right side, the smallest on the left, and a medium one in the middle. So, some of you who might know your anatomy better might be thinking, well, hang on, I mean, when we talk about the heart today, we talk about four chambers. So, two ventricles at the bottom, one on the right, one on the left, two atria on the top, one on the right, one on the left. For those of you who don't care too much about the terminology, basically today we do separate the heart into four chambers, four cavities. Aristotle here is describing three, and he's not just saying three in random. He's telling us where they are on the orientation of the heart and relative size of them. So let me show you the way we presented it in 3D. This is taken from our digital atlas. I'll put a link and a QR code at the end. It's open for anyone to use. So we can see here, we're going to look into the right cavity, which is the largest one, according to Aristotle. And this is his smallest cavity, which is on the left. Some of you might say 1 minute, that's the left atrium. For Aristotle, it's just the smallest left cavity on the left. And the middle-sized cavity in the middle of the body. And inside these cavities, as he mentioned, and as is depicted here, he sees these cords, these tendons, these neura. They're depicted in different directions, based on also other passages that we have in Aristotle. So one thing first of all to note here about the importance and interesting point in Aristotle and this text is the fact that he describes the internal structure of the heart. We have earlier texts which mention the heart and even mention diseases which occur through the heart. They mention some connections to vessels, but we don't have a close consideration of the structure, of the internal structure of the heart, the fact that it's divided into chambers, the fact that we can distinguish inside its actual particular chords. Okay, we'll see an image later with the next example, but for some of you who, again, know the internal anatomy more closely, might already have in mind particular chords that one can find there, and we even use the word chord to describe them today. And for Aristotle, this morphological, the structural evidence and description and details that he identifies have an important significance, important relevance for his physiological idea of how he thinks the body functions and the heart inside the system of the body. The three chambers allow him to discuss three different types of blood, which he identifies in the heart. For him, the heart holds in all its three chambers blood. It's not it might sound obvious to us today, but we'll soon encounter a text which doesn't think it's so obvious, and it actually wasn't the most common idea in antiquity that all parts of the heart, all chambers have blood in them. Aristotle distinguishes different bloods of different temperatures, with again this idea of the one in the middle, which is also medial in size. It also has the most tempered blood inside it. Um, and when we had to visualize, to create a visualization, when we had to decide about these structures, the structure of the heart and how to depict it, we could not just say three chambers, or we had to take into account where these different chambers could lie, and how does this fit into the fact that the heart, we understood what kind of heart he's looking at. He was looking at different hearts of also of regular mammals, of cows and pigs. The heart is more or less the same concept as the human heart of four chambers. So why does he not see four? Which one is he talking about when he talks about the smallest one? We had to make these decisions much more concrete than if we were just writing or translating the text, writing an article. So for Aristotle, also this different types blood, the different types of blood in the heart, and the fact that he hints at the idea of some blood moving between the walls, what we call septa, the septa in plural, the different walls between the cavities and the chambers, some blood migrating through it and sipping through in order to temper the blood in the middle cavity, led us to also create some small holes in the middle of the septum, something that we don't see and don't think one has in the heart today. That's not the modern anatomical theory. But moreover, for Aristotle, the idea of neura, these chords inside the heart, it's not just a random perchance for him. Nothing is perchance for him and for most ancient physicians in antiquity, who believed that every single thing in the body was constructed by nature, or by this creating nature, in a way, according to a design, in order for it to function exactly and perform the function that that part needs to perform. So when he's looking at these chords and he needs to explain them, he finds an explanation which fits in, or shapes. That's another question, whether the empirical observation he's making helps him explain a theory, or is the theory he already has about the soul and the heart and its importance shapes how he explains these chords. It's very difficult. It's kind of the egg and the chicken question. It's difficult to pinpoint what came first in his process of thinking. It's still difficult for many researchers today. But for him, these neura, these chords, have a significant role in performing the function of locomotion, of moving our limbs. They look exactly like the chords, the neura. That's what there was still what we call tendons today around our joints, which help us move the bones, connected between our muscles and our bones. For him, these neura, these chords inside the heart, look exactly the same, and he makes a connection between them physiologically, that the heart is the center and the motor center of the body, with the aid of these chords, affects the chords at our joints and helps us move the body. Of course, there's many questions that you might be asking yourself at the moment. Some questions researchers are still debating of how this actually happens, how Aristotle explained physiologically, materially, this connection. But for him, this anatomy and this observation of the material structure that he's seeing in terms of functionality, it helps him explain and justify, support his theory of the functioning of the body and the importance of the heart. What you see here is a printed version of our model. We couldn't show all of the three chambers, so the two main cavities. You can see here close to us the right big one and the left smaller, middle one, sorry. And of course, once we have a printed model, even a digital 3D model, one can think of various ways of simulations and further research which one can do once we have a model. So it's not just, again, about this process of understanding through this creation of the model or presenting it more clearly, but also what one can then do and research through this model that we've created. So moving to our second example, which is the treatise from the 3rd century BC, from the Hippocratic corpus. So this is supposedly how the Hippocrates looked, and I assume most of you at least have heard of the Hippocratic Oath. There was a physician around the 5th century BC called Hippocrates. He did write some treatises, but what we call the Hippocratic corpus is 60 treatises from spanning about 200 years, which Hippocrates became such an authority so quickly that very close after his death already, people were beginning to kind of take particular treatises and put them under the name of Hippocrates to lend them more authority. And this is one of the treatises. We don't know who decided that exactly when exactly it came to be called under Hippocrates, but this is a matter set aside. What is important is that we have a short treatise called, very fittingly, On the Heart. It's almost like a concise crash course in cardiac anatomy, which it opens with a description of the heart and its shape and its color, and it takes us further and further in through some experiments that it performs on pigs, through dissections and some dissection instructions. And again, very concise, fascinating. It's been my hobby horse for several years already, and still there's so much still to do. And interestingly, this treatise is the first written description we have from ancient Greece of the valves of the heart. So again, assume most of you have heard of the valves of the heart. These either professionally through your work or by chance or from unfortunate clinical reasons. But these are these sort of valves or doors. We have 4 of them, according to modern anatomical theory, in our heart, which help direct and make sure that different materials, fluids move to where they need to move and don't go into places they shouldn't go. And in antiquity, just very short, also in the late 3rd century BC, shortly after this treatise, already they recognized 4 valves. But in this treatise, it seems after some debate between scholars, but it's fairly accepted, and our work has recently demonstrated this also quite strongly, that the author recognizes only 2 of the 4 valves that we recognize today and that some of his later colleagues recognize. Before we look at these and understand better something about these valves and his theory, let me say that for this author, it's clearly there are only 2 chambers of the heart, or what he calls bellies or cavities of the heart. He distinguished them, again, very much detail about the shape, the particular texture of the walls and the thickness, but also about the content of each of these chambers. So for him, the entire right side of the heart and the entire left side, so what in modern medicine we would consider the ventricle and atrium on each side, for him, each of those 2 modern chambers, so to speak, is 1 chamber. And he sees these 2 chambers of the heart, the right and the left side of the heart. And for him, the left side has blood, but the right side has no blood in it. And this idea, which may seem to us very strange, is actually a very common idea for various other physicians and philosophers in antiquity who saw the left side of the heart as not having blood or very, very little blood. And let's see what this author, and following him, others will do as well, of what does this mean about the left side. But before we look at that, let's again try and for a moment understand what I'm talking about with valves. So these are 2 of the valves, which connect, this is taken from a human body, which connect between our hearts, the right and left side, and 2 major vessels in our body. I'm leaving out too many technical names, but if you're interested, you can ask later. And you can see here these sort of three membranes which meet together. We also call them the semilunar valves because of the shape. So just to give you some context, some of you may be familiar with these kind of images of where these are found in the human heart. So we recognize today four valves, but the author calls as valves, or he calls them doors, only these two valves. But we'll soon see what happens, what he does about these two. So let's read a bit more text, this time, again, also written in Greek. And there remains the account of the concealed membranes of the heart, a work most worthy of recounting, which is something really that the ancients love talking about, the beauty of nature, how worthy it is of how it's created the body. For the membranes and some other structures are shaped spread out in the cavities like spider webs, girding the orifices of the heart from every direction and sending probes to the firm part of the heart. There is a pair of vessels attached to the heart orifices, and to each of them 3 membranes were designed as doors. These are rounded from their edges, just like semicircles. So we've modeled this, take away the lungs, take away the pericardium that the author also mentions. You can see here, again, sort of just an initial orientation with the 2 major vessels connected. And if we fade for a moment the right cavity, and the left cavity, we see inside already something slightly different from what Aristotle was seen to describe to us, just where he talks only about chords. If we fade the vessels, we can see these sort of discs, these doors, and created, constructed of, according to the author, of 3 sort of semilunar membranes. Also we can see inside this, what he calls these other structures, membranes and other structures. This is how he depicted it, this sort of white and red material. And I'll talk about them for a moment in a second, just not in the next slide. But just if you do want a bit more information, because I'm going to go through it fairly quickly, through our atlas, you can also read about all the research behind and the justification for why we made the decision to model it in this particular way. So what did we do here? So here's the text again. Okay, and this is how we modeled. This is the left cavity with these membranes and some other structures and spider webs and probes inside. Okay, so I'm just going to show something a bit from a real heart, from a pig. So here we are looking, we opened a left cavity of the heart and we opened it. So, you know, you can't see the cavity anymore. You're seeing the internal walls. And look what we see here where we marked it as A, this is what we understood that he's seen as membranes, sending out spider webs and then probes to the wall of the heart, to the firm part. Just a short note, the word he uses for these probes is actually the word that is also used to describe the bark of trees, and one can see some similarity. For those in the know, probably are saying, one moment, hang on, these are the valves. These are the valves that connect between different parts of the heart, and this is what helps make them helps us have 4 chambers in the heart. So it's true. The author is seeing and observing the structures that are the 2 additional valves that we recognize today, and again, some of the ancients recognized as valves, as doors. But this physician is looking at it and he can't grasp, because of the way he's dissecting or because of how it looks, that there are actually valves, that they are actually doors. And just to show you, I'm going to show another photo from the dissection for those who are wondering about how can one see 2 chambers in the heart and not 4. Then with this photo taken from a dog's heart, then we can see this. We dissected it the way he tells us to dissect, and we see inside here these spider webs, which are supposedly distinguishing between an upper and a lower chamber, but for him it's just 1 chamber on each side. And just to say, the fact that he does recognize that these semilunar valves are actually valves, that they are actually doors, is quite incredible. This is again taken from a pig, and this is a very experienced veterinary surgeon that it took us 30 to 40 minutes to put the valve back together to create this door. It's not obvious, even those that he did recognize, to look at these materials and to say, oh, that's a door that closes. It fits back together. Once the body is not functioning and not alive, it doesn't look and function in that way. I'm going to go through this just very briefly, just to say that this, for the author as well, the fact that there's a door which closes off the left side of the heart is very important, and he stresses that this side closes more tightly because it allows him to say that this side has no blood and allows for a clean, controlling part of the soul. And he does also an experiment that we recreated where he squirts some water to show that there really no water passes through. So again, we may think of what sort of came before what. How did he know? Maybe someone before him realized that this is a door, and he just received this information and built a theory based on it. But then the question just goes back to how did someone else decide that when we are looking at these small membranes, we should think to close them? And in this author, we see how he looked at different membranes and didn't think that they close into a door. We can really see this difficulty of looking at what seems so obvious to us today in thinking that these are valves, and the difficulty of not necessarily seeing that. This is just to show a bit from our work from the lab, just for those who have been in anatomy labs. It's not really, there's too much paper here and too much going on because of the way we work, because of the protocol that we create in order to, with particular research questions along the way that we want to make sure we document. Because as soon as we find the answer, even if we don't manage, but as soon as we encounter the structures we were looking for or trying to understand, if we don't immediately write down and record our answer, things are lost after 2 minutes, or so much detail inside the body. You can go also into our portal where we show you step by step all the reenactments with the text alongside the text. And we've also published some of this information and our results and why they're relevant to beyond the humanities and beyond our field, and how it has helped us even solve manuscript problems through this dissection method. So just to conclude very briefly in saying that, I mean, this was really a sort of just a bit of ancient anatomy on one particular part with two particular authors, but I hope it gave you a good taste of the complexity of the things and how incredible it is of what they were able to see, but what they also made out of what they were observing, and how our new methods have allowed to show this more concretely and to decide, make decisions, and forced us when modeling, for instance, these membranes and other things, we had to make a decision on what we should be showing. And it raises the question, and it always raises among us also in the team, with our veterinary physicians and our human physicians as well, of what is it that what is it lying there which we just are not seeing yet because we don't have the technology, or because we're asking the wrong questions and don't have the right glasses on. Because some of the information that the ancients were not seeing is so obvious to us today. So why weren't they seeing it, and what aren't we not seeing today? And some of our research, especially, for instance, the dissections, soon to be published also in one of the Nature publications, journals, about how our work has shown the importance of tacit learning in medical education, but also more broadly in our work on history of medicine about the doctor-patient interaction and what the ancients, before technology and machines and lots of instruments came between the patients and doctors, can allow us to maybe bring back into this very important interaction. So thank you all very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Wow, that is a lot to digest. Thank you so, so much, Orly. That's, yeah, I'm glad there's a
I'll
recording. I'm
put a
gonna
light on.
it.
Okay,
Um,
yes.
yeah, oh, the light is dying out. So yes, we do have a few questions. Let's start from the top. Oh, that's a bit of a macabre one. Did they learn about anatomy in the same way the Victorians did? I mean, we kind of know now, which is rather gory. They either had stolen and paid for or dug up the bodies of the poor, basically. Was that the practice back then? Do we even know?
Um, so Interestingly enough, Galen, about whom I didn't speak, tells us so he couldn't dissect human beings because of the taboos of the time. But he does tell us that you might, especially that bones can be learned on humans. So the bones don't decay, of course, like this the in the same way that the soft tissues does. And in antiquity, don't forget that death was much more present. So he tells us that you might be walking along a country road and someone may have been murdered there, and you might find their body and be able to use the bones to learn about it. He even tells you how to clean the bones in the river from the soft tissues. So not well, there is some information that maybe he also dug up or his assistants did some. Some bones, but it's a bit unclear and a gray area. But basically, it wasn't like the Victorian times, and definitely not the same on the same scale and the same sort of system of payment for this and so forth. But it is a very good question, actually.
Yeah. Do, 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 do. Oh yeah, that's one that's quite poignant. I found it sort of it was difficult to decipher what they meant by the text. Did they not leave any drawings that would have been so helpful for themselves, for the students, for you, for us?
For us, yeah. Yes. So, excellent question. So, Aristotle did actually create, or again, with his assistants, a kind of anatomical atlas. We do know he created some drawings. He sometimes refers to them in his text. He tells us tell us to go and look at that treatise, or he tells us how the drawing, sort of a lettered kind of schema, sort of basic illustration. We don't know the level of detail. Obviously, they didn't have 3D modeling at the time, but it wasn't like a fresco, right? So it was very much simpler mediums of drawings, but they're all lost to us. We don't have any of that which we can use. What we have is in later medieval manuscripts, some of the copyists sometimes try to add these drawings, but again, they're not the original drawings. They're their interpretation of the text. They're just like our 3D models, just done closer to the time. And interestingly, Galen, for instance, who has extensive, detailed anatomical descriptions, does not, he only twice refers to illustrations, and he explicitly doesn't want to use illustrations because he believes that illustrations are not sufficient as an anatomical educational tool. One should be using the bodies, which mirrors a bit some discussions which are going on nowadays in medical education with digital tools and the place of anatomy and dissection in the medical education. So we had they had some drawings, not many, not everyone, and they're all lost to us, unfortunately.
Mm, that's a shame. Um, with which other institutions do you collaborate, given the very specialist nature of your work?
Okay, so my team and my lab we have we have quite a lot of diversity in our profession. So we have classicists and historians of science, but also we have the 3D modelers, we have the software developers and the data scientists, AI people. And we also have the veterinary people. One of my team is also a medical physician and a classicist. But we work closely with the veterinary anatomy people who are really part of our team, including especially one of the students, doctoral students who uh, working with us regularly all the time, and all the dissections are planned by us together with the veterinary experts, and it's the veterinary expert who does most of the dissection, just so we know, because the expertise which is required and the mistakes which can be done very easily by cutting something the wrong way by mistake or just too deep. We prefer to leave it to the professionals most of the time, except when we can experiment a bit more. So basically, the most of the everything we need is in our team, which we built in a way which is interdisciplinary, and allows us to work regularly together, while also, of course, collaborating with our colleagues from the different fields.
Interesting. I bet there's like a different jargon between you, sort of crossing the room. You're talking almost different languages. Is there scope
It's
to
become
apply?
it's an interesting point just to say that we've built, because we've been working together for over 5 years, we have built and created these new languages between us, and different languages, of course. But of course, there's a way to go, and it's not an obvious kind of collaboration. And we've been fortunate enough to have really the best people one could dream of in a team. So it has worked and has been very, very fruitful.
Amazing. Is there scope to apply this sort of technique, this method to other fields, other disciplines?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm not sure if we're speaking which of these techniques and methods. So let me say something very brief about each of them. So the whole idea of visual analysis, which does exist, for instance, in archaeology, but and some of the other fields, but not so much in the study of history of medicine. But it is relevant in other sciences as well, and history of other sciences. And that's what we are soon going to be publishing, about how to put it, trying to establish the method in more concrete terms and standards. The idea of so you saw part, I didn't speak about it in detail, but you saw a bit from our digital atlas, which connects between our 3D visualizations, the research behind it, the terminology, and so forth. And this is something that we're already working with other researchers from different fields, from Quranic studies, from East Asia, the study of Asian studies, working on very different fields, in order to create these kind of sort of knowledge environments where one can showcase and have a research platform which connects between the visual, the terminology, the timelines, and so forth, rather than just have 5 printed books, which one needs to go to 5 different libraries or 5 different folders and documents, and try and connect them in a less coherent and smooth way. So we're definitely sort of making these methods more available for other fields and researchers. And of course, the issue of reenactment is happening also in other fields of history of science. Some of my colleagues, for instance, in history of alchemy, and we are the first to do it systematically for the history of ancient medicine. But the concept of reenacting has been done, but we're documenting it and setting down the method in more concrete terms, so it can be used not just sort of ad hoc, but have a real methodological grounding to it.
Next one, how helpful have AI tools been in your work?
Good question. Very helpful, very confusing, very fruitful. That's actually quite a big thing that when we started was completely far from us in many ways, also because things have happened very much in recent years. But we have developed a software for applying using AI tools and existing AI tools that we trained for our text, in order to do really not just simple analysis, but deep research on our databases. So our text with our annotations of them, and our teaching existing models to work with our text in our closed environment, so without hallucinating from various things that the AI likes to decide about. And it has been very fruitful. And for instance, in our atlas, you can find different terms detailed analysis of these terms in our different works, in the different ancient works. To write such a page, to go through so many sources and to grasp and explain the ideas of the term and how it changed in the different texts was something that would take weeks of work of a researcher. And with the AI tools that we again developed specifically tailored to our kind of work, we've cut it down to hours of work. But again, there's always this human in the loop where we are using AI to expedite, but always are checking and controlling and revising and writing. And this is also something that can be made more generic, that we will be working with colleagues. And AI is something, for instance, that we are collaborating much more with other colleagues from outside the team, because there's so much going on in actually AI and classics, and there's a lot to do still. And as everyone knows, it's changing every day.
Another question here is, can Atlomi become an infrastructure for other researchers as well?
Yeah, so Atlomi as such, so for instance, the atlas itself, we already have, just take two ways, two levels to answer this. In the field of history of medicine and history of anatomy, it is already becoming a platform for others, because we are soon going to we've been working with other colleagues on models from different periods. So we'll soon have a model for medieval anatomy. And we ourselves are planning, I didn't show you, but we already have, you can sneak peek some physiological animations that we are working on. So all still on this atlas, our atlas of the history of anatomy. But the concept itself of, again, taking such a platform which connects visuals, whether 3D or 2D, and particular points in that visual to particular terminology, to particular references and sources, to particular analysis of the researcher. This is a platform which we are now working to make more generic with other colleagues at the Hebrew University and beyond. Because the concept and publishing in this way is where I think that's where we should be going. Not instead of printed material, but in addition, to allow publishing of such forms of analysis, what we call multimodal, but basically means more than just words that we have to show.
Fascinating. This one is mine. When you described, I can't remember who it was now, who was squirting water into the heart to show that the valves work. Can you say that this is the beginning of an empirical way of studying not just the body, studying nature, and not less philosophical and narrative, maybe?
So I wouldn't say it's the beginning, because even in the earlier texts that we have, we see, I would say it's one example of early empirical work. So even from a text from the 5th century BC on a disease which is similar to epilepsy, he tells us how one of the reasons that one of the justifications he finds for the fact that epilepsy is caused from problems in the brain and too much fluid there is the fact that he opens the brain of an epileptic goat and sees the fluid there. So, and that's the 5th century BC. So just to say that sometimes the criteria and the standards and the documentation of the experiments, the biases with which they come, might be different from our standards, but they do have a lot of empirical experimental work. And what is interesting is always exactly that, of to think, so why are they performing? What is the question they're trying to ask? And why are they performing this particular experiment? How many times did they need to perform it? How did they think about performing it? And what are the conclusions that they're drawing from it? And how is, I mean, how much the theoretical bias on what they want to find and how they want to explain the soul, for instance, and the function of a particular part, how much does that affect how the kind of empirical work they're even setting out to do? And of course, this is a problem and an issue that we even know about today in ancient science, today in modern science of of the methodological challenges of and biases that we have when we perform empirical experimental work.
Yeah, it's a good point, actually. We're still not free from trying to make reality fit what we already think or think we know. I think that was the last of the questions. Yes, it was. So I'll say thank you very much, and I'll pass over to Nigel. Stage is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Orly. That was a real heady mix of disciplines, as I would expect from the Hebrew University, of course. I head the British Friends of the university, and our organization was established about 100 years ago, just 1 year after the university itself. And I was sitting here thinking, I wonder what our great founders, Einstein and Freud and Buber and Weizmann and Chadam, would have thought of this particular session today. But they certainly couldn't have envisaged what you are working on, Orly, which I'm sure everyone will agree was extremely interesting. We're very grateful. You're in Nice at the moment, Orly. I'm not in
I
Geneva.
am.
I'm in London.
But my
Ariana's in
heart is in
London.
at the Hebrew University, of course.
Of course it is. And other parts of your body as well, I hope.
That's a philosophical question. It's for a
Exactly.
different talk.
Exactly. I want to thank you particularly, Orly, for your time and for agreeing to do this when we last met, I think, in November in London. So thank you so much. Thank you to all our guests, whether you're in the States or the UK or Israel or elsewhere. Thank you to you, Ariana. Without you, nothing would have happened. So thank you. And I wish everyone better times than we have today. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.